that you were recommending as a trade candidate, and I really like this one. Talk about Rashee Rice.
Yeah, the guy hasn't played a snap, and his stock just keeps rising. You saw all the receivers wearing a shirt that said "Free Rashee."
Yeah,
like they know this offense can't do anything without him. I think once he comes back, it's like a guaranteed top 10 wide receiver by fantasy points per game. But yeah, I think he's going to be one of the top league winners of the season, despite missing all this time. What?
Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
School of Scott Fantasy Football Podcast. Theo Greminger and Scott Barrett every single week on the Fantasy Points Podcast Network, getting you ready to crush the week ahead and taking a look at the week we just had. Got to talk about it, Scott. Early on, all offseason long, the two of us had amazing guests on all summer. We had Matthew Berry, Rich Rebar, you name it, Sean Siegel. So many people came through, joined us, and we were constantly talking to guests about who's this year's breakout offense. Who is the breakout offense that is going to produce multiple ADP wins? We now have 2 weeks of actual NFL data in the books. Are the Indianapolis Colts that team?
Yeah, I think so. I said last week, I think Daniel Jones is this year's, not even Sam Darnold. He's this year's Baker Mayfield. This offense looks awesome. And, I'm not really all that surprised. I was always a big believer in Shane Steichen. You saw what Justin Herbert did with him in his rookie season, and then didn't really do much for the next 2 or 3 seasons after that. You saw what he did for Jalen Hurts, easily a career high in fantasy points per game, 4 points over any other season of his career. And then sure, things were rough for Anthony Richardson, but the guy had no accuracy. He was the least accurate quarterback since Tim Tebow. And now you have a guy who can run the offense, who has a lot of the similarities to the quarterbacks Steichen has had a ton of success with. And what are the results? Right now, the Colts haven't punted the ball or had a turnover on a single drive, which is absolutely ridiculous. Daniel Jones, yeah, why not? 2020 all the way through 2024 literally had a bottom 3 offensive line, a bottom 3 receiving core. I like all these receivers. Alec Pierce led the league in deep receiving yards per game last year. Adonai Mitchell, wide receiver 4, is the ass god. Michael Pittman was a stud. A guy going really early in dynasty startups. He dealt with a back injury last year. Josh Downs, I think is the most talented of all of them. Slot machine, and another, ass killer. And then you have Tyler Warren, who's, looking like Brock Bowers light or Brock Bowers 2.0. And this is a top 7 offensive line. And, it's not Tim Tebow levels of bad with Daniel Jones. So Shane Steichen can just sort of play Madden out there and trust Daniel Jones to run the plays as they're designed. And yeah, you see a lot of play action. You see a lot of during snap motion. You see a lot of the efficiency cheat codes that come from a really good play caller. And it looks like Steichen's a really good play caller. And so from a fantasy perspective, you had Daniel Jones last week, 3 straight carries from the 1 yard line. And only Saquon and Chase Brown have more carries from inside the 5 than Daniel Jones. Very few incompletions, really good efficiency. So yeah, why can't he be a top 7 fantasy point per game quarterback? Jonathan Taylor, look at how many carries he had last week. Look at how many carries he had at the tail end of last year. Look at his splits with and without Anthony Richardson over that span. I don't see why he can't be a top 5 fantasy running back. The wide receivers might be, a little bit of a committee. Tyler Warren, however, is probably only 2 tight ends I'd rather have on my roster right now.
Yeah, and just the relative cost for Michael Pittman. Pittman's averaging 14 points per game now, but you were able to get him just so late in drafts. There was drafts where he was falling to like the 11th round. You were basically paying, wide receiver 4, low-end wide receiver 4 price tag for Pittman. So he's definitely looks like a winner. Josh Downs,
let's keep in mind last week, Michael Pittman faced off against Patrick Surtain's shadow coverage. You're not going to do anything against that ever. So, maybe even now is a good time to target him in a trade. If you agree with me and you agree with Theo that this is an offense to be invested in, I will just say I don't see as much upside as for Warren or for Jonathan Taylor, but for sure an ADP beater.
Yeah, Warren and Taylor are the guys. Tyler Warren, I had a couple of high stakes FFPC people, NFFC people sort of DMing with me. I dropped this takeaways, this top 10 takeaways, where I basically break down the week on Fantasy Football Daily podcast right here on the Fantasy Points Podcast Network, also on Fantasy Points YouTube. I talked about Tyler Warren, I talked about Daniel Jones, and I kind of called him a top 5 tight end this year. And people were sort of like, if he were drafted again, I would take him tight end 3. I pushed back a little. And later on the show, Scott's going to break down sort of the new tight end hierarchy. Everybody knows Brock Bowers, Trey McBride. We're going to sort of talk about some players that we've really sort of adjusted on. But Jonathan Taylor, Tyler Warren, those two guys, incredible draft picks so far. Taylor looks so good. He's even producing as a receiver. I mean, we can't lean on that every single week. But Scott, what's telling is we now have seen Daniel Jones against the Denver Broncos. This was the one that we circled in the preseason, sort of, is Indianapolis for real as a team? Is Daniel Jones going to survive this one? He was better as a passer, 316 passing yards against Denver this week, and he scored another rushing touchdown. So that's in the bag. Is Daniel Jones a potential savior for Joe Burrow type managers? And I'll give you his next few games. At Tennessee, at the LA Rams in week 4, which is a really, really fun one, Vegas at home, and then Arizona at home. And Arizona has suffered a few defensive injuries recently where that defense might not look as good in week 6 as they did early in the year. Thoughts on this upcoming schedule for Daniel Jones?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's all a lot softer than Denver's defense. The stat I had in the Everything report, which is back to being a paywalled article, by the way, he threw for over 300 yards. That was just the third 300-yard game Denver had given up to a passer in 30 games. And so whatever defense he's facing next is going to be softer than Denver's defense. So yeah, I savior for Daniel Jones teams for sure. But like, don't forget, there's also a lot of teams that, took a gamble on a late round quarterback who wasn't Drake May and, maybe isn't working out. So that's a great target for them. Or even if you do have Drake May, like Daniel Jones that scores May and is actually the Exodia quarterback you wanted, that really wouldn't shock me.
Yeah, it's definitely a tilting team. And that's definitely a team that we're moving up in a positive way. One team that I think we have to adjust expectations for is the Cincinnati Bengals. We talked about this a little bit in the pre-show. Joe Burrow injured once again. We saw this in 2023. Jake Browning took over, Scott, and Jake Browning won 4 games that year as a starter. He also gave us 5 QB1 finishes. The offensive environment is still very, very strong in Cincinnati. The game flow with having a sort of a soft defense and a combination of having very strong skill position players. Browning's an interesting one, especially in Superflex leagues. Your expectations for Browning, and how do you see the Cincinnati skill position players moving forward?
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm bullish. Like Browning as a low end QB1 this week. That's sort of how I see it. Ryan Heath wrote this up in the Everything report, and I thought he did a beautiful job with it. But when Burrow has been out and Jake Browning has come in, they've really remained as aggressively hyper pass heavy as they always did with Joe Burrow. So we're talking about like top 3 rates in the league. But they are changing the offense to fit Browning. You see more under center play action. You see more screen targets. That's you never see any screen targets with Joe Burrow. And so I'm bullish. Last time this happened, Jake Browning was the overall QB1 in fantasy his last 6 games he started. And so I think we can trust in him being a fringe QB1 moving forward. I think Chase Brown could potentially benefit getting more screen targets, just like we saw Joe Mixon benefit last time this happened. And Jamar Chase, I think he's fine. It's just Jamar Chase. He's an absolute freak. I know the production wasn't there last time this happened, but Matt Harmon had a great tweet on this where he talked about this. He's used differently now, where he gets more design targets, more short area stuff to take advantage of Yak, and like he's just the best wide receiver in football. So he's still an easy, top 5 wide receiver in my eyes. T. Higgins, I think, could suffer. I think that's probably the guy who suffers. But everyone else, it's disappointing, but it's really not the end of the world. And I really don't see it as too dramatic of a step back unless you were a Burrow Higgins owner, let's say.
Yeah, I think Higgins, you sort of nailed it. I think if you have the opportunity to pivot off of Higgins in a redraft league, then that's one that we want to keep an eye on. In Dynasty, Higgins is locked in with that contract, at least for another season, so don't have to be sort of as reactionary. Love the takeaway on Chase Brown. Chase Brown was a little bit disappointing last week. I think that the using Chase Brown more in the passing game, that could be something that could be a real benefit for Chase Brown managers. I think he's actually a potential buy low option. You're starting to see some trades go down, especially in Dynasty formats with Burrow, but I think the tertiary weapons around him, those players also are going to be interesting. Chase is so locked in. I think if anything, when we see backup quarterbacks come in, they hyper target the top option a little bit more. I mean, Chase is locked in, top 3, top 4 wide receiver. That's sort of the floor, with wide receiver 1 overall repeat still in the wheelhouse. Every week, Scott, we're talking about the Everything Report, a big article written by you, also with Ryan Heath. It's sort of appointment reading for anyone in fantasy football. If you want access to the Everything Report, subscribe to Fantasy Points, use the code Theo and get 15% off. You're also going to have access to our amazing rankings, to our amazing projections, to Graham Barfield's articles, to my articles. We have so many things that can help you win in fantasy. Again, use the code Theo for 15% off any package. And if you want to really level things up, get the Fantasy Points data suite, the best source of analytics, the best source of anything you can imagine analytically and also statistically to help you get better at fantasy football. Scott, the Everything Report's absolute fire, and everything that you get off of there, you're using the Fantasy Points data suite. One statistic you're always talking about on these podcasts, and sometimes confusing to people, you're talking about AS all the time. Why don't you break down what average separation score is, how it can benefit fantasy football managers? And we had a couple of big hits on this podcast last year, identifying guys that would break out using this metric.
Yeah. Average separation score. We do it better than anyone else. Next Gen Stats. Their average separate is like just totally unusable. They count like screen targets as you like get positive separation. And it's based on only targets. And, I don't like the way ESPN does it. And so our way we think is better. It's also more predictive. It's like shockingly predictive. Ryan Heath found over this offseason that if you control for route participation, it's actually more predictive than yards per route run for future fantasy points, which that was the holy grail stat. That was always what's the best, most predictive stat for wide receivers. It's yards per route run. And now this, and like, of course that makes sense. Like you're counting production in that. And so the predictiveness for this stat, which is not, a production, it doesn't count yards or targets or anything like that, is really shocking. But basically it tells you how good a receiver is at getting open. It's not the end all be all. Deebo Samuel never really ranks highly in AS. Why? Because he's a missed tackle force machine and a yak god. And then you have other receivers like maybe a Cortland Sutton, who's more of a contested catch guy. But basically this tells you who's doing a really good job of separating. You can control for various things within the data suite. You can look at it at only man or zone or only slot versus out wide. But some takeaways from what I've seen through 2 weeks is Matthew Golden currently leads all wide receivers in AS and by a pretty wide margin. I will say with this, we don't have AS over expectation yet. And it is, I believe, Brett Whitefield might disagree, but I believe it's the case that Matt LaFleur kind of games this with like, I think he's the best play caller in football. He would be the best play caller in fantasy football if he didn't have these like disgusting committees where no one besides Tucker Kraft has a snap share above 70%. But I digress. Matthew Golden, at the very least, above Romeo Doubs, above Dontavian Wicks, and he's at number 1. So I think it's just a matter of time before his route share picks up. These separation wins start translating to targets. Yeah, Davante Adams at his old age, ranking top 3 in ass. I feel really good about him because Cooper Kupp scored a lot of fantasy points from weeks 1 through 11 last year, and his ass was horrible. And now you have Davante Adams stepping in with a great ass. I think that's big. I think that matters. I think that's substantial. You have Zay Flowers, Mike Evans, Romo Dunze, Justin Jefferson, all in the top 10 because, of course, one guy who's popped, Bryson Tremaine from the Carolina Panthers. So if you're in a deep dynasty league, pick up Bryson Tremaine. Xavier Legette just had the worst wide receiver game in NFL history. He had 8 targets and negative receiving yards. At a certain point, I think it's going to be obvious to Carolina. Let's not defer to draft capital here. Let's just get the better guy in the field. And that might be Bryson Tremaine.
I mean, we saw last year Dave Canales give an opportunity to an undrafted free agent out of Holy Cross and Jalen Coker. So Bryson Tremaine, go Google him and then go ahead and add him. He's not a made-up player. He's an actual NFL player, guys.
Did you know who he was before this week?
I saw him when I was doing my waiver wire article. I was sort of off my radar. I wrote up Hunter Renfrow. Renfrow had a decent game. So I think in formats like NFFC, in certain FFPC leagues, I think Renfro's interesting until Coker comes back. But they're really only using Renfrow in 3 wide receiver sets. So they need an outside wide receiver. They talked about Jalen Coker being used in the slot, which I thought was interesting. You could think of Coker as a guy that they could bounce outside as well. But I mean, Dave Canales is a guy who's going to play whoever is good. We also saw him use Chuba Hubbard over Miles Sanders when Sanders had that big free agent signing there. So I think Canales is a guy who will play, and obviously used Andy Dalton over Bryce Young last year, benched him for all Andy Dalton. So yeah, anybody who's kind of showing out in Carolina, they need a secondary wide receiver besides Tetairoa McMillan. So yeah, I'm open to Tremaine. Tremaine is the guy, Scott. And I'll say, people listening to this average separation score data last year at this time, around week 3, around week 4, Scott and I were telling everyone to go and trade for Ladd McConkey and redraft to acquire him in Dynasty. We kept telling you the Ladd McConkey's breakout games are coming. And it was not just because we liked the fact that he was a prospect that we were into, but it was the average separation score. Ladd was just popping off the page on Fantasy Points data. Lo and behold, Ladd McConkey ends up being a smash for you in the second half of the year, and then ends up setting the NFL record for the most receiving yardage by a rookie in the NFL playoffs. Ladd McConkey, if you listened to us last year on School of Scott, based on average separation score, you would have had an opportunity to acquire him for a lot cheaper than he is today. So really, really highly recommend you level your game up with Fantasy Points data. Absolutely. It is one of the best resources you can have in fantasy football. Scott, let's talk about the Exodia Bouncebacks. And you can, if you want to go check out the YouTube comments from our previous show, you're getting a lot of heat for the Kenneth Walker call out. This was people were coming out pretty hard. Kenneth Walker ends up having this really tilting game 1. The two of us had him in an FFPC main event lineup. We were tilting very, very hard. I have Kenneth Walker rocking a lot of places. We saw that first game against San Francisco. Zach Charbonnet found the end zone. Charbonnet had 58% of snaps to Walker's 40%. It was about as tilting as it gets. Last week on School of Scott, you sort of said to kind of stay the course. You were tilted, but not panicking. And then this past week, big vindication for Scott Barrett and the Exodia players. Kenneth Walker ends up having an awesome game. Seattle goes into Pittsburgh at 1 p.m., goes across the country on the East Coast, goes into Pittsburgh and wins the game. Jackson Smith-Njigba has another strong game, but I think the story for fantasy managers had to have been Kenneth Walker, so much more productive than Charbonnet. There was still a split here in terms of time and in terms of touches, but Walker was just far and away. Talk about it a little bit and your expectations of how this backfield split is going to look moving forward and Walker's value to fantasy managers.
Yeah, I think Sam Sherman put it perfectly. He had a tweet the other day. Can't believe the 1-game sample of Charbonnet being better than Kenneth Walker didn't hold over the previous 30-game sample of Walker being better. And I think, we just got kind of distracted when, like, what's the most likely thing is like, no. Kenneth Walker is a lot better. And eventually, the usage is going to highlight that. Yeah, Charbonnet actually out-touched Kenneth Walker last week, but it's that Walker had 118 yards from scrimmage. Charbonnet had 10. And by the way, Walker also came really close to having another 60-yard touchdown on those limited touches. And it's just, I don't know how this doesn't just start to creep up until we're back to like an 80, 85, 90% touch share in this backfield. I still don't really know why this happened week 1, week 2. And I'm going to hope, maybe it just had something to do with he missed a lot of time in August, late July, and he's healthy now. So it's go time. Let's not have the guy who averages 1/10 the yards from scrimmage per touch as the other guy touch the ball the same amount of times.
Yeah, and I can make a sort of a glass half full argument that a split is okay because it's keeping Walker fresh. Those explosive plays for Walker are really something that have helped his fantasy value over the years, getting opportunities for that in a Clint Kubiak system that we very much believe in. And the vibes are good for Seattle right now. I think that's the big takeaway for me as well. They could have beat San Francisco. They could have been 2-0. This is a team where I believe in them. I believe in the system. And now it's sort of a big sigh of relief for Kenneth Walker managers. One little note that we need to start tracking is Pittsburgh Steelers, where we saw Breece Hall and Justin Fields sort of run all over them in week 1. Then this past week, and Braylon Allen had the rushing score. Then this past week, we see Kenneth Walker running all over them. We're not ready to call Pittsburgh a team where we want to jam every running back in the lineup against them, but it's something we want to really monitor this week as well. So Pittsburgh could be a team that funnels fantasy points to the running back position. This is an interesting one. We usually don't associate Pittsburgh with this, but things change rapidly in the NFL. Another thing that changed rapidly and another big win for you. I think this is the one that probably you were most satisfied with over Walker, over some of the players that you were, targeting early in drafts, was Cam Skattebo. People who watched our FFPC live streams, Scott, we got into it a couple times over Cam Skattebo. Listen, I feel much better about it right now. Cam Skattebo seems to have taken over the New York backfield, ends up rushing for 50+ yards. And I read some quotes from Skattebo. He is not happy at all with this production. He thinks rushing for 50 yards is way too low, wants more this week. Sports Illustrated article had that. But Skattebo finds the end zone as a runner. Tyrone Tracy's still involved as a pass catcher, but with Skattebo's profile coming out of Arizona State, we think that's a role that is going to grow for him. Your thoughts on Skattebo and the room to run for his profile moving forward on a Giants offense that looked really good this past weekend?
Yeah, that was shocking. I mean, and that's just kind of football, guys. It's not the case that I trashed Russell Wilson coming out of week 1. And it was, I think it was really the case that based on film, based on the stats, Russell Wilson looked like the worst quarterback in football in week 1. Week 2, he looked like one of the best. But yeah, I'm going to kind of savor this. I'm going to enjoy this because you gave me so much grief, Theo. And I warned you. I said I'm gonna make Tommy or Trey, find those clips, pull it, and shove it in your face. Week 18, at that point, hopefully Skattebo's a league winner. I will say, the timing of it, Tyrone Tracy did kind of throw the play callers under the bus, or Brian Dable under the bus in some comments. Maybe he was in trouble and this is just a 1 week thing. Personally, I don't think so. I think it's just we've been trending this direction, and I think Skattebo is just way more talented. And even if it's like a 50% snap share this week, the big thing is Skattebo is 7 of the team's 7 backfield touches inside the red zone. Even by targets is very similar, or at least catches. Tracy is not a good pass catcher. And so I think Skattebo is a lock for all the high value touches. So even a 50% snap share is like a 66% XFP share. And yeah, you know, the efficiency hasn't been great. One would argue that I have a plotter fetish, which is something Graham Barfield used to make fun of me for, is I would always seem to like these plotter type running backs. And he thought Skattebo was sort of plotterish. Or you could say what I think is the impact of Andrew Thomas is, you know, one of the biggest potential impacts short of, you know, getting your starting quarterback back. So I think the efficiency is really going to improve once that happens. And more than anything, just really, you know, we're hoping for just below average levels of quarterback play with the Giants, or competent levels of quarterback play. And that was something we haven't seen since, you know, like the glory days of Eli Manning. So we're going to take the Giants offense looking functional, and everything's trending in the right direction. I think what you're hoping for Cam Skattebo, by the way, I said week 9 is Marshall Chalk status when he goes full on Exodia. What does that really mean? I don't think you're expecting too much more than 2025 Javonte or like 2019 Leonard Fournette. I'm not expecting a ton of efficiency. I'm just hoping for all the red zone work, a good amount of targets, and one of the perks of rostering Skattebo is the dude is fun. He runs angry. The dude is fun. So you're going to get a lot of that as well.
The shout out to the undroppables, Jax Falcone and those guys. They have player comps on their website, and they gave Cam Skattebo's player comp is Theo Greminger. And they said
how could you be a hater? How could he not be your favorite player?
It was not quite a hater. It was a little bit of a rational exuberance and a game theory of not wanting to have exposure to the same guy in every single FFPC main event. And I didn't. It's fine. I have him in 3 mains with you, but then I added him in another main in Vegas, and I added him in an NFFC primetime draft that I share with Dan Williamson. Shout out to Dan Williamson, a really good high stakes player, co-host of Fantasy Empire. We split a bunch of teams, but we drafted another Cam Skattebo one. So I'm just like, I think I sent you a message. I'm like, you can't keep getting away with this. You're in my head on Skattebo. But Dan and I got another share of him. So I'm heavily exposed to Skattebo. And like you said, like for a 9th round pick, a 10th round pick in this sort of range, if you end up getting 8 15-point weeks out of him, that's a huge win at that sort of range. And it's the kind of profile that you want to attack in these ambiguous backfields. So yeah, I hope you're 100% right on Cam Skattebo. So a huge win for Cam Skattebo this past week. I think this week Cam Skattebo is going to be in a lot of starting lineups. Another player who you were questioning your Exodia quarterback, not like overly, but you were like, maybe it should have been Herbert, and maybe it should have been Justin Fields. Huge performance from Drake Maye this past week. You have to be feeling good about things. Drake Maye, big win for New England. New England scored 33 points, and I think that's really a massive step forward for them as an offense. Miami has issues, but New England was very, very impressive. We saw Drake Maye struggle a little bit against Vegas, had the interception. This past week, the rushing yardage goes up. He has 31 rushing yards, finds the end zone as a runner, also has 2 touchdown passes, 0 interceptions. Got to be feeling good about Drake Maye. What were your thoughts on what you saw out of him, and what do you expect moving forward?
Yeah, I thought this was great. 19 of 23 for 230 yards, 2 touchdowns. The rushing was there, 7 carries, 34 yards and a score. 3 of those design runs, 26.3 fantasy points. So you had the great passing efficiency, you had the rushing, and you had a ton of fantasy production. So that was awesome. I will just say, came against the Dolphins. That's probably the worst defense in football. If it's not them, it's the Cowboys. And so he did what he was supposed to do. And so just let's hope that sticks. Some more encouraging signals is New England's one of the most pass heavy offenses. You had Bootie's route share down a little last week. Diggs' route share is still slowly working its way up. So you just hope this wasn't just a mediocre team beat up on a bad defense. And you hope Maye can continue this. But right now, everything looks good.
Yeah, and for Drake Maye, the next 2 weeks, it's the Pittsburgh Steelers. And Pittsburgh, again, was a team where I think we might have to adjust our defensive expectations for them. The Jets scored 30-plus on them. And this past week, Sam Darnold had 2 touchdown passes against them. So I think that matchup, you're still going to start Drake Maye. And then in week 4, Drake Maye gets Carolina in New England, which I think we would define as sort of a plus matchup for him and a matchup we would be pretty excited about. So I think Drake Maye can build on what we saw this past week. The vibes are good with New England, and the vibes are certainly good with Drake Maye. And the Exodia quarterback is looking a little better this week with so many quarterbacks out this week. Justin Fields set to miss, Jaden Daniels set to miss, J.J. McCarthy set to miss, and of course, Joe Burrow is out. So Drake Maye has a chance to really have a strong week and make a big impact for fantasy managers and keep that positive momentum moving forward. Scott, is Malik Nabers just simply put the best skill position player in the NFL right now?
I think there's an argument for it. I tweeted out that he's better than Justin Jefferson, and then I got aggregated by FanDuel, and I had a bunch of people yelling at me and questioning my intelligence. I am a Giants fan, but I am no homer. I think for the past 8 years, the only Giants players I've ever recommended you to take in fantasy are Saquon Barkley, Malik Nabers, and Cam Skattebo, and that's it. I am not a hot take artist. I don't care about your Twitter retweets. I say controversial things a lot and have people yell at me, but I always believe in it. And so when I say this, Malik Nabers, I think is better than I really believe it. It's based on the analytics. It's also based on the film. And I really just think you're dealing with that level of talent, sort of everything that we saw last year with league worst levels of quarterback play, which is like substantially worse than below average levels of quarterback play. Made me think that watching every one of his targets in week 1, insane. Just the level of separation he was getting, the body positioning, the yards after catch. And so I was hoping for just competent quarterback play this year. And I figured it would come once Andrew Thomas was healthy and once Jackson Dart was starting. We got it in week 2 against a really bad defense, fair, but we got it in week 2, and it was Russell Wilson opening things up for Malik Nabers. It was something he never had. He was great in the short to intermediate. He was a missed tackle force machine last year, historically great there in college. And so we knew he had that in his bag. Also a great deep threat in college, but not in the pros. Last year, he ranked 7th in yards per game, but just 52nd in deep receiving yards per game. Russell Wilson, who, for all his faults at this stage of his career, might have the best deep ball in NFL history, honestly, like that, a real statement. Malik Nabers, week 2, had 279 air yards, the 4th most in fantasy points data history. And he scored 25.5 fantasy points on deep targets. All of last year, 33.9. And so this just an already elite fantasy asset, a really incredible talent, just unlocked a whole new area of his game that was just totally missing, but not his fault. And I could not be any more encouraged. A true volume receiver in every sense of the word. I remember talking to one of my sources who would know about the discrepancy in targets between Malik Nabers and BTJ, their final year at LSU. And he told me, a little bit of that is Nabers is an asshole. Like he wants his 10 plus targets per game. And if he doesn't get it, he might throw a fit. Whereas BTJ is a little more laid back. The thing is he warrants it. Like one of my favorite stats from last year was Nabers what was it? Week 14 ranked 7th among all wide receivers in EPA per target. And then every other wide receiver on the team was negative. Wan'Dale Robinson dead last in EPA per target. And so you had this guy breaking fantasy points data era records in target share, first read target share. And he was actually deserving of more targets because he was the only good one on his team. And that's maybe what we saw week 2. That's another part of it is Matt Eberflus. His defense is always designed to stop an opposing team's number 1 receiver. And you saw that in week 1, heavy cloud coverage on AJ Brown held to just 1 catch. He did that same soft coverage, cloud coverage, extra defensive attention on Nabers. And it didn't slow him down at all. The dude is I love to watch him play. I love to have him on my fantasy teams. That was something I was depending on when you read my draft guide, there was a point where I had Nabers basically that high. I had him wide receiver 2 or wide receiver, and I didn't stick with it. He did have a back injury, missed some of August, but certainly now it's like turn off injuries. The 3 most valuable players in fantasy, it's easy. It's Nabers, Puka, CMC. Factor in injury risk. It might be Nabers number 1. What do you think? Is that too bold? Is that too spicy?
No, I mean, I would include Jamar Chase in that mix. I think
without Burrow?
Even without Burrow, I think that Jake Browning is going to lock in on him. I think that I don't worry about Jamar Chase. Chase also has the ability to put up spike weeks like no other. And I don't think that necessarily goes away. And again, like no other. I mean, the guys you mentioned are also capable of putting up huge spike weeks. But, I'm sort of like pulling teeth here over including Chase there. But I think that's a great trio. But I think when it comes down to Nabers, there's a chance Nabers is the 101 in our drafts next year. And I think that's not like bombastic. It's not reactionary to what we saw this past week. We saw what he was able to do last year. Like fantasy points data, he broke it. Air yard share, first read rate, target share was all through the roof. He broke Puka Nacua's wide receiver reception record for a rookie in only 15 games played. A stat that I've been looking at this week, which is wild, is Malik Nabers has played 17 regular season games, and he's had double-digit targets in 12 of them. That's disgusting. And even this year, I think there's a little bit of room to run. He's got a 30.8% target share on fantasy points data right now. I would guess that when we come back here in week 6, it's going to be a little bit higher than that because it's been a little bit more balanced. Wan'Dale has been fantastic the first 2 weeks in terms of his production, and I think that'll sort of trickle down. I think this is going to be more and more Nabers, and they're just going to lean on him. But even right now, it's a over 50% air yard share, 46% first read rate. He's ridiculous. And I said it this week that I think this could be the next 200 target player in the NFL. We've been searching for this for so many years. There's only been 3 of them: Marvin Harrison Sr., Calvin Johnson, and then the last one to do it was Julio Jones. I think Nabers could get there this year. And Scott, we've also talked about the trend where the last 4 years, the wide receiver 1 overall has led the NFL in targets, led the NFL in catches. I think if Nabers stays healthy, he's in that mix for the wide receiver 1 overall. So I'm completely with you. I think if you have a chance to pivot off of Justin Jefferson for Malik Nabers in Dynasty, I think that's fine. And if you want to, if you're more scared of Jake Browning than Scott and I are, I think Jamar Chase, Malik Nabers is a reasonable conversation to have right now. We also have Malik Nabers on an FFPC main event team, which made a big comeback this week, Scott. We dropped about 200 points, and we started out our draft with Malik Nabers. We followed up with Puka Nacua in round 2.
Oh, baby.
You mentioned Davante Adams earlier, but we used to sort of salivate on this last year where we talked about the consolidated target share. Shout out to Brett Whitefield. We got to get this consolidation score up there at some point. But I love talking about consolidated offenses. For fantasy football, when we have consolidation, it makes things so much easier. And when we have great players getting consolidated targets, then that's just how you win fantasy leagues. You've always talked about just how good Sean McVay offenses can be for fantasy football. I mean, you've talked about this for years about all these league winners that come out of there. But what we saw this past week was sort of our dream over the summer. Shout out to Chris Wecht. We had him on, who does just some of the best projections available anywhere for you. Chris Wecht talked about his enthusiasm for Davante Adams this summer. All three of us were overly enthusiastic over Puka Nacua. And now this past week, we get a 65% combined targets. And then, Scott, you wrote about this in the Everything Report, a 69% first read rate combined between Puka and Davante Adams. Puka looks like a wide receiver 1 overall candidate. Davante Adams might be a top 8 wide receiver. This is just like a perfect scenario for us in fantasy football.
Yeah, that's really how I see it. We've seen over the last few years, it can be the case where Puka Nacua is a top 5 wide receiver and Cooper Kupp is getting top 12, top 15 levels of volume. And it really seemed like that might be the floor. But then you get in a Davante Adams who looks far less cooked than a Cooper Kupp, who is separating at an extremely high level. Then it becomes, like you're saying, the possibility of Puka being top 3 and then Adams being fringe top 7. A stat I had in the Everything Report, right now, Adams leads all wide receivers in XFP per route run. Puka almost set the fantasy points data record last year. And then Puka ranks 4th by the same stat. So it doesn't get much better than that. A very hyper-condensed offense where Matthew Stafford's throwing to his first read 89% of the time, and they're getting open and it's working. And yeah, like we said, the Sean McVay offense, always money for fantasy. It looks better now with this upgrade from Kupp to Adams. It looks more condensed than ever. And so, yeah, DFS, Matthew Stafford double stacks are live every single week. And then for fantasy, let's pray that everyone stays healthy. Matthew Stafford's back holds up. But this is really exciting right now.
Yeah, and what's interesting is it's only 4 targets for Kyren Williams through 2 weeks. Kyron's been not really that productive. Now you have a little bit of threat with Blake Corum. So it's really becoming more and more wide receiver centric. It's sort of like a carryover effect from what we saw from the second half of last year. So I think this holds up. I think that the actionable way to play this is you're not going to be able to trade for Puka Nacua in most places, but I do think Davante Adams is attainable. I think he's a great mercenary candidate for dynasty managers. Go ahead and get him. Even at his age, he's going to give you this year type production. If you're a contender, go get yourself Davante Adams. And I think in some redraft leagues, Davante Adams still might be slightly attainable. Not as many sites were as high on Davante as we were at fantasy points. So you don't know if your league mates had this sort of enthusiasm level that we have for him. Love the way this offense looked. We just talked about Nabers. We just talked about Puka Nacua. We've also often talked about how rookie wide receivers have been sort of cheat code for us the last few years. And looks like we have another one of them, and it's Tetairoa McMillan. McMillan is really, really coming on. What are your takeaways with 2-week sample size for McMillan? This past week, he had his first 100-yard game as a pro, and I think a lot more of those are coming on.
Yeah, he looks great. It kind of reminds me of, what I was just saying before about Nabers having this tremendous target share, but actually being deserving of more targets. That's what it seems like the case is with McMillan. Like I said, Leggett had negative receiving yards on 8 targets, right? So let's not do that again. The guy looks incredible. His film looks incredible. Even his incompletions are highlight reel worthy. And yeah, so there was that garbage time, fourth quarter, the trailing 18 points and just really kept the foot on the gas. There's going to be a lot of that this year. But before that, the first 7 quarters, the stat I had was Tet McMillan accounted for 46% of the team's receiving yards. That would rank 4th best among all wide receivers. And yet, you pull up the numbers in the fantasy points data suite. He's just 44th in target share, just 17th in total targets. So the guy looks incredible. He had a 100-yard game. That's great. But let's get him even more involved. He's deserving of it.
Yeah, and both weeks he's had a near catch that's been like an incompletion, like where he's like Spider-Man. He's trying to catch everything on the sideline. We saw this at Arizona where he'd make these just highlight reel catches, and it's sort of coming on in the NFL as well. He's a true alpha wide receiver. We got to talk about one wide receiver, though, that there is insane panic on right now. Brian Thomas Jr., there's a lot of like Jacksonville Jaguars fans that are really up in arms about his performance this past week. They, of course, lost to Cincinnati. Very, very tight game. Jacksonville had many chances to win. Usage-wise, BTJ was fine, more than fine, at 12 targets. But there's people saying he has the yips. He's worried about catching the ball over the middle. There's all sorts of negativity here, not just with fantasy managers, but also with NFL fans. Where are you at on BTJ? Is this everybody chill out, he's going to be fine? Do you have any sort of, like, where are you at on this one? I'm a little bit torn. I'm a little annoyed at myself for going so heavy on BTJ and not mixing in a little more Sun God. That's a whole nother story. But BTJ, where are you at? Is this going to be like a bounce back candidate, a buy low candidate, or do you have some nervousness?
Yeah, it's really weird. Liam Cohen did say he came into the game with a wrist injury. I also like the argument that he has PTSD from so many Trevor Lawrence hospital balls. And there were a bunch week 2, a bunch of those incompletions were probably plays he was going to take a big hit on. Yeah. And he was so much more productive with Mac Jones, and he's been less productive with Trevor Lawrence. And this is something you've heard from Doug Peterson. When he coached Trevor Lawrence, you heard Liam Cohen talk about it. He does have a tendency to just lock on to his first read, led all quarterbacks in first read rate each of the last 3 seasons. And all that's a concern. Maybe potentially a good thing is Travis Hunter looks awful. The ass is really bad. The separation win rate is really bad. And this was like part of the perk that we wanted with Liam Cohen is, he said after he took the job is like, I won't be able to sleep easy at night if I don't get BTJ 10 plus targets per game or 10 plus catches per game. And, we saw last year him, you dial up the screen game at one of the highest rates in the league, have a ton of success with that. That's great for fantasy. Those are guaranteed fantasy points because the completion rate on those is like 99%. And, getting BTJ involved in the slot where he's such a mismatch, and he set the fantasy points data record for fantasy points per route run from the slot. And so just balancing all these different things, given what we saw from BTJ, Mac Jones was better than Trevor Lawrence, we could say, but like no world beater. I really don't know why BTJ can't do what he did last year. And I think maybe this is the wrist.
Yeah, nice of Liam Cohen to tell us about the risk too, where we find out about it after the game and all this sort of stuff. Like, we love that transparency, Liam Cohen. That was very, very cool. I don't know. This one for me, he's got a 25% target share. That's good. You talked about the screen game. We're seeing a higher design target rate for him this year. Well, not really. Those have gone to Travis Hunter. We've also seen Parker Washington with 2 of them. The sample size is just small on that. We're not seeing a whole lot of design targets besides Hunter at the wide receiver position. I think that the big takeaway for me is Jacksonville's offense looks functional. And I think that was sort of a big hurdle to overcome. BTJ was scoring very well on a sort of a bottom offense last year. I trust Liam Cohen to get this going. I don't think BTJ is going to return value like we thought he could have this year. Just not the vibes I'm getting. I hope I'm wrong. My BTJ bags are packed. I have a ton of them. So I hope I'm wrong on this one, but we'll see. I'm sure we're going to talk about BTJ the next couple of weeks. Very, very tilting for Brian Thomas managers these next few weeks. We're going to talk about the panic meter here. Who are you most panicked about right now? Omarion Hampton, Ashton Jeanty, or TreVeyon Henderson?
Oh, TreVeyon Henderson, probably. You saw it last week. Like it was bad where you had Antonio Gibson with the special teams touchdown. You had Ramondre with the 55-yard touchdown catch. Like, isn't that what TreVeyon Henderson was supposed to be? And so you had both running backs get better usage. TreVeyon Henderson then falling to RB3. And, we knew this would be a committee. I comped him to rookie season Jahmyr Gibbs, where, maybe the touches weren't high, but the hyper efficiency was there. And, like the downside of these sort of bet on talent players when the projected touches aren't there, sometimes the touches could be really low. And so, for sure that to me, Ashton Jeanty, Omarion, Hampton, really tough run defenses they face, but at least the volume's there. Really worried about Ashton Jeanty's offensive line, not going to lie, but at least the touches are still there. So yeah, to me, it's TreVeyon Henderson.
Yeah, I get Henderson, and Henderson, this is one where I'm super disappointed in it. I didn't think that Antonio Gibson would be involved. I certainly drafted some Henderson, especially late in the summer, trying to add more Henderson shares. Very, very worried about that one. And again, we talked about New England scoring 33 points this past week. Very tilting to hear that the long reception over the top for Ramondre Stevenson, that could have been a TreVeyon Henderson route. It just makes no sense to me that New England would draft him this highly and then just not use him. So I do think TreVeyon Henderson at some point, New England's going to he'll at least usurp Gibson. And I don't think Stevenson will run quite as pure as he has. So I agree. There's a lot of worries and concerns with Henderson, especially after he steamed up into round 3. Omarion Hampton, at least we know the offense is very good. Very, very tilting game without Monday Night Football, Scott. I think if he would have just fallen in the end zone, people wouldn't have been quite as worried. A couple times he got tackled behind the line of scrimmage. For me, the one that I'm most worried about is actually Ashton Jeanty, though, because you had to take him inside of round 1. Hampton, you were taking inside of round 4 often. Henderson, a lot of people were packing 5th round bags. He rose up. But Jeanty, this is not what we signed up for. And the snaps went down in week 2 versus week 1. Pete Carroll talks about sort of, hey, we got to ramp him up and all this. You took him 6th overall. Like this is you're using Dylan Lobby and Zamir White when you have Ashton Jeanty. This is not at all what we signed up for. Do I think Ashton Jeanty is going to be a complete flop? No, not at all. I still believe in Ashton Jeanty, the talent, but I didn't believe that we would see this sort of Ashton Jeanty snap share this early on in the year. So for me, just based on the cost of him at ADP, Jeanty has the most pressure on him to perform. When you draft in fantasy, if you have a bad 5th round pick, that doesn't ruin your draft. If you have a bad 4th round pick, you can still win your league. But if you completely strike out in the 1st round, you're pretty much doomed unless you nail every other round. So for me, Ashton Jeanty, that's the one that I'm most nervous about. Really, really want to see a big turnaround week from him. Thoughts?
Yeah, I'm not really as worried. I didn't think the snap share was that bad. And like, what did Dylan Lobby and Zamir White do? Like they combined for negative rushing yards and I don't know, 3 or 4 catches. It's, like it was never going to be a Ashton Jeanty game when you lose by multiple scores against a really good run defense. Just like if this were Derrick Henry in a 9-20 loss, he would have scored like 7 fantasy points, and maybe even, Jonathan Taylor or prime Nick Chubb. You see that these guys are more game script sensitive. And so this wasn't going to be an Ashton Jeanty game. What scares me the most, I think, is this offensive line. It just looks so bad. A stat we have at Fantasy Points Data, percentage of carries where first contact came behind the line of scrimmage. Raiders are dead last right now. They're at 40%. Look at Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, right? And the Commanders. They're at 9%. They're best in the league. 49ers, four times that. So yeah, that's concerning. That's a little rough. You'd like a little bit more target volume, more routes run for Jeanty, but it's early. It's second game of his career. Bad matchup, bad game script. I'm still holding out hope.
Yeah, I definitely not giving up, but a little bit of concern. This rookie running back class, again, there's going to be some hits here. Bashal Tutin looks like he's coming on. We talked about Cam Skattebo. Certainly Quinshon Judkins for his first game had some really impressive moments. So I don't think the script has been written. And one thing that we want to keep stressing to everyone is what you see in week 1 and week 2 and week 3 and week 4. If we look at like the leading scorers in week 4, they're not going to be the complete leading scorers when we get to week 15, 16, 17. A lot of times in fantasy, it takes guys a little time to ramp up. We've seen that over the years. It's just not what we signed up for with this rookie class that we were hyping up for so long this summer. Let's get the negativity out of the way. Let's talk about something very, very positive. Let's talk about our guy, Devon Achane, and how I don't think people are talking about Achane enough right now, Scott. How do you value him moving forward, and your thoughts on his impressive usage over the first 2 weeks of the year?
Yeah, it was awesome. The dream for him was, maybe he could potentially have 1,000 upside, like a Christian McCaffrey did once upon a time, because as a rookie at 800 yards and just 103 carries, best yards per carry ever. And then last year was on pace for 100 catches with Tua under center. And we saw team high 10 targets, 8 catches, 92 yards as a pass catcher. That's great. Unfortunately, the stat I just referenced for Ashton Jeanty, the Dolphins were right behind the Raiders in that stat. This is not a good offensive line. And that's not great, but it looks like Achane could be a garbage time superhero for your fantasy teams this year. Rack up a lot of catches like this.
Yeah, the pass catching for Achane, he's just so automatic with it. We've got Miami this week on a Thursday night against Buffalo. We got to think that that's going to be a game that they're going to have to use Achane as a receiver, even more so. A really difficult game for Miami. Such a good pick so far with Achane. And the Ollie Gordon still has contingent upside, but the narrative that Ollie Gordon was going to carve out this massive weekly role, a la like Raheem Mostert, that ship has sailed. The snap share is just so far in favor of Achane. Achane's basically playing every single snap. So Gordon, still roster him. Don't go and cut him. But the Gordon narratives maybe got a little bit overblown. I'll take a little credit for that one. I was hyping the Gordon train this summer. Still believe in Gordon as a handcuff, but Devon Achane, just unbelievable. And we look at this 2-year sample size of, well, not 2 years, about this year and last year, where he's been able to take on this level of quality as a receiver out of the backfield. I think that this is going to translate for him over the rest of his career. Achane sort of has like that Kamara vibe when the ball's in his hands out of the backfield, just looks so good, natural pass catcher. Feel great if you drafted Devon Achane inside of round 2. Scott, let's pivot over to the tight end position because we talked about it in the pre-show. 2 tight ends that I want to get your opinion on here that I think need to vault up the tight end rest of the season rankings. Tucker Kraft, who we also have on our 2 FFPC main event teams. Tucker Kraft looks absolutely fantastic. Baby Kittle, Yak King, just had a fantastic game. We actually had the Tucker Kraft game was terrific against Washington last week on Thursday. And then your guy, Jake Ferguson, another guy who I've sort of faded over the years. Jake Ferguson the usage just looks fantastic for him. Your thoughts on sort of where Tucker Kraft should settle in the tight end rankings and where Ferguson should for the rest of the season?
Oh yeah. Ferguson, I don't know, probably fringe top 10. I want to say Tucker Kraft mid-range tight end 1. I would have to look at my rankings to know for sure, but yeah, I really regret not being even higher on Tucker Kraft. He's just felt like such an obvious bet on talent player in hindsight. I was really worried about the lack of targets and Matt LaFleur. Target's still not great, but the dude just is incredible. And it seems like, and LaFleur, offensive play calling GOAT. And it does seem like he is going to get a target boost because why wouldn't you? He just had one of the best yards per target by a tight end ever. And even if the targets aren't there, he is the only full-time player in this offense. The stat I had in the everything report is he leads his snap share on passing plays is 95%. Romeo Doubs is next closest at 75%, and Matthew Golden 61%. So he's really the only guy who's like constantly out there. And then Ferguson, it's I guess it's Dak Prescott just loves tight ends. You look at Ferguson's production with Dak Prescott over his last, 20 or so games. He's 7.6 targets, 12.5 fantasy points per game, easy mid-range tight end 1 numbers. I love that he went off last week, which was a man heavy, single high heavy matchup. Really should favor Lamb and Pickens. And no, it was Ferguson who led all tight ends and led the team in targets, and now ranks second among all tight ends in XFP per game.
Yeah, Ferguson's one that I've got to really, really move up. I think I was very bullish on Tucker Kraft this past offseason. Also have some dynasty exposure to him. I think he's going to end up being a major, major winner. Might be the most valuable tight end. He was going behind Tyler Warren in a lot of those drafts, considerably lower than him, probably 2 rounds below him in some of those FFPC leagues. Tucker Kraft, I think there's room to run. Jaden Reed is going to miss a good deal of time here. And I think it's just self-scouting to get your best receiver the ball as often as possible. Kraft is just in a great, great spot. Jake Ferguson, this Dallas Cowboys offense, I think when it comes down to it, I think Ferguson not going to challenge for top 5 tight end numbers, but I'd be shocked if he's not like a top 8, top 9 tight end this year. The one tight end that has seemingly come out of nowhere, and we see it every single year, Scott, where a tight end is drafted as a tight end 3 or goes undrafted and then finishes as a tight end 1. Last year, we saw it with Jonnu Smith. Jonnu Smith had his career year last year. It's looking like that could be Juwan Johnson this year. Juwan Johnson currently leads all tight ends in targets and receptions and is averaging 15.8 points per game. And I'll give a quick little segue. The Kellen Moore offense right now, Chris Olave is like top 5 in wide receiver targets. Juwan Johnson leads all tight ends in targets. They're not a great offense, but they're very easy to predict fantasy wise. And I think guys are going to beat some expectations, specifically Juwan Johnson.
Yeah. We have seen this a lot. Anyone remember Gary Barnidge?
How about Dalton Schultz when he came out of nowhere?
Right. Yeah. So I like this player. They paid a lot of money to in the offseason. And the volume's just insane. He leads all players at all positions and snaps. Would rank 10th among all wide receivers in XFP per game. I'm viewing him as like a fringe top 7 tight end moving forward. Production's been good too, by the way. But yeah, it's really a function of this Kellen Moore offense that just runs at such a frenzied pace, and the defense isn't great. So they're always forced to play aggressive and pass heavy. Just leads to a lot of expected fantasy points. Spencer Rattler's not great, so fewer fantasy points than expected, but still a really good amount. If they trade for Kirk Cousins somehow, I would shock you with the names of players I would have Chris Olave over.
Yeah, Olave's a really fun one, and we didn't even have him on the show sheet. But Olave, again, getting so many targets that I think that this is a sort of a buy low candidate for you, especially in redraft leagues. But Juwan Johnson, he's definitely, you can get him because I don't think people are sort of believing it. But this usage doesn't lie. Like you said, they paid him in the offseason, and they've talked him up. I think Kellen Moore really, really likes Juwan Johnson. I'm into it, Scott. I think this is a real one. Let's quickly talk about 2 veterans. We talk about buy low candidates, and there's also buy high candidates. Javonte Williams and Keenan Allen. Hey, listen, this time last year, Javonte Williams left for dead. Keenan Allen, there was a long period of time this offseason where he was completely unsigned. He's older. Are these 2 players here to stay? Do you agree with me that these are the sort of players you should be looking to buy high in your fantasy leagues?
Yeah, well, I'm certainly buying into Javonte. The usage is just really good, and this Dallas offense looks really legit. 75% snap share. 33 carries through 2 games, 9 targets, 10.5% target share, 17.4 XFP per game. And you have a very, I think something like 70% of their plays inside the red zone have been runs. So that's really beneficial for Javonte. So I'm buying into that. Like, I do think he's lost a step. I don't think he's the same guy he was as a rookie, but it's just that role is really valuable. And it seems like they want him to be the guy. I'm buying Keenan Allen from the sense that was one of the best ball picks you could have made, which is actually what I said all off season. Cause he was free for 90% of the summer. I think that's right. I think he's going to be a thorn in the side of Ladd McConkey to an extent. I don't know that he's going to be a fantasy difference maker. I think he's a guy who just eats up bench space and, maybe bye week fill in, that really isn't that valuable to me. I want to be chasing upside mostly, but those spots, and I'm willing to cede maybe, 2 points as a bye week fill in for it. But yeah, like it doesn't surprise me that Keenan Allen, not Ladd McConkey, currently leads the team in targets. This is Justin Herbert's BFF. He had 13 targets with Herbert 2 years ago, and he didn't look washed last year. He led the Bears in ass. He led the Bears in yards per game minus screen targets. So to me, it's just kind of frustrating because if Keenan wasn't there, maybe Ladd would be higher than a mid-range wide receiver 2, which is where I have him now. But yeah, this is another reason I like Herbert, I guess.
We talked about those two guys as sort of buy high. I think I'm a little more enthusiastic than you are. I think that Javonte, the role's going to hold up as long as he can hold up. And Keenan Allen, I'm just buying into this offense. I think that they've de-emphasized the tight end position. Justin Herbert looks so good. I think Keenan Allen, like you said, it's bye week fill-ins, but it's also, I think in certain start 3 wide receiver type formats, I think he could provide a lot of utility to fantasy managers. And I think people are going to look at him as I'm selling him high, that I didn't have any trade value for him 2 weeks ago. Now I've got something. Let me see what I can get. I would also consider using Keenan Allen as sort of a poison pill player, where maybe you make a 1-for-1 and you ask for Keenan Allen as a throw in. Depending on the trade, you might have that. And in certain formats, I think he can help you. Javonte, I was such a hater, but Dallas trusts him. And Miles Sanders, nothing behind him there. So for me, I think Javonte, as long as he can hold up, he can give you RB2 value. There's one player you talked about, a high profile player in the everything report this week that you were recommending as a trade candidate. And I really like this one. Talk about Rashee Rice.
Yeah, the guy hasn't played a snap and his stock just keeps rising. You saw all the receivers wearing a shirt that said free Rashee.
Yeah.
Like they know this offense can't do anything without him. And maybe Xavier Worthy comes back. I kind of don't see it happening, but even if he does, like a sling on his shoulder and he's 165 pounds, I don't see him being a volume guy. And so, yeah, I think once he comes back, it's like a guaranteed top 10 wide receiver by fantasy points per game. I would go out of my way to target for him. And that's one of the perks right now of starting off 2-0 is, especially if the guy who has Rashee is 0-2. Say, hey, you need help right now. Let me give you J.K. Dobbins and let me give you Javonte. You give me Rashee Rice. And so you can make one of those lower time preference trades. But yeah, I think he's going to be one of the top league winners of the season, despite missing all this time.
Yeah, at Kansas City, I think he's going to get about as much as he can handle. If we look at the Hollywood Brown targets in week 1, you could see games like that with Rashee Rice and him putting up 25 points. So I really, really think that this is a buying opportunity. Take advantage of the fact that you're 2-0 and look for 0-2 Rashee Rice managers who are in complete panic mode. Last week, Scott, I sort of sandbagged you with this question. You have a little extra time to prepare for this one. Every week on School of Scott, to end the show, we're going to drop a bold prediction for the week ahead. Talking about week 3, you want me to start or you want to start this time?
Well, I can take it. I think for DFS, Dallas versus Chicago is going to just break tournaments. I think you want as many as much exposure to players on those teams as possible. Right now, both defenses are bottom 3 in points per drive allowed, EPA per drop back allowed, just about any stat you can think of. I'm a resident Caleb hater, but I actually thought he's looked pretty good these past 2 weeks, or certainly significantly improved upon a season ago. And, Romo Dunze balling out. So yeah, I like that. Another sneaky DFS play is, I wouldn't be shocked if Marcus Mariota finishes top 5 at the position in fantasy points this week. You could stack him up with Terry McLaurin, who he really favored a season ago in DFS, if you don't want to go the Dallas Chicago route.
Yeah, or stack him up with our guy Deebo Samuel, who could have elevated usage as a runner in this game. So love the Marcus Mariota call. I tried it last week. I had my Tua lineups in DFS. Those almost cashed pretty big. I still ended up winning some money with those Tua lineups. So love that, Scott. Make sure you tune in for all of our great DFS content. I don't think any single fantasy site has better DFS content than we do, especially when you consider how much we're giving you on Fantasy Points YouTube. I tuned into some of your DFS shows this week. They're absolutely fantastic. Really, really high level stuff. For me, my bold prediction is Jordan Mason. This is Jordan Mason week. Jordan Mason, the Vikings are 2.5 point favorites over Cincinnati this week. I think that Minnesota is going to lean on Jordan Mason. JJ McCarthy is out. Aaron Jones is headed to the IR. I think Jordan Mason puts up close to 20 PPR points this week. I think he can find the end zone once or twice. I think he's going to rush for over 100 yards. And I think that this is an opportunity for Jordan Mason to really grab a stranglehold over this running back job. I think when Aaron Jones comes back, I think Mason might have established himself. This was a lot of the narrative with Mason this offseason when he was rising up, is the age of Aaron Jones, the potential for contingent upside, and Jordan Mason. They seem to really like him as a runner. We're going to find out pretty quickly, but I think this is Jordan Mason week, another potential player to use in DFS, but hey, he might be heavily rostered in DFS this week. That's why you got to listen to Scott and the DFS experts at Fantasy Points. They're going to get you prepared. Make sure you're checking out everything we're dropping. My waiver wire article is up. Scott's everything report is up. Some of the best tools in the business, the best projections, the best rankings. We've got you covered at Fantasy Points. Use the code Theo, get 15% off. And if you're listening to School of Scott on the podcast feed, go over to Fantasy Points YouTube, subscribe to our page. It costs you nothing. It helps us out a lot. And vice versa. If you're watching us on YouTube, subscribe to the podcast. And make sure you're also subscribed to Fantasy Football Daily. I'm dropping multiple episodes a week, and Dynasty Life. Make sure to subscribe to that one as well. We're going to see you next week. Let's crush our leagues this week.